Struggling to Breathe Inside the Wheezer Necromorphs Perpetual Battle by Roanoke Gaming.
Properly subduing a species for assimilation into a brethren moon is a meticulous and horrifying process, both of which descriptions are intentional. Many different moving pieces need to go into effect at very specific points, indicating that this is not just some random event, but an actual takeover. At first, the species is highly unlikely to recognize what is happening right in front of them due to the chaos that is taking place. But for any survivors that may live long enough to see the progression of the events, they will understand that these are calculated steps being imposed by something much larger that is definitely having an end goal. From the perspective of the beings currently dealing with what amounts to a herpes outbreak for a planet, it would seemingly appear to be just a microorganism that is inducing genetic changes in the host, turning them into monsters through skeletal growth and reanimating anyone concerning those that have already dropped. Really, though,
it is very logical, and I think that's why I like it. I think Dead Space consistently has been an IP that is great. I love it. I haven't watched the movies. They're a little too visceral, is the word I'll use. Not my cup of tea, but things like Resident Evil, things like Dead Space, right? I have a love of. It's that supernatural body horror kind of thing that is just a step above reality, but not quite super over the top, right? In some cases, yeah, super over the top, right? Don't get me wrong. Like how by Torres Mendez in RE4, right? Somehow his body would interact with the Plaga, and interesting things all around. But no, Dead Space consistently gets shafted. We've had Dead Space Android before, a lot of phone games were really a thing, right? Because now we have modern gaming. You play Genshin, Honkai Star Rail on your phone. Remember, we had a Dead Space mobile game. We had a rail shooter, Extraction, on the Wii, right? We've had a number of really banger titles. 2 still holds up to this day, all but the crashes on modern software, right? Windows 11. But it's still one of my favorite games to speed run through. It's really good. It's really solid. And unfortunately, Dead Space just gets thrown on the road. We have Dead Space 3, which was the first death of Dead Space. Afterwards, right, kind of got put on ice. And then we had, really after the Dead Space remake, allegedly EA said that it didn't meet the quota it needed to, so they will not be going forward with another project. I hope they do. I hope, Dead Space is everything it needs to succeed. It's a rant because it continuously pisses me off that it's with EA, a company that keeps dropping the ball.
So they become more of sort of like a meat puppet to this growth that has several other growth points and origins. On the other sides of things, the Brethren Moon's perspective, it would just simply be like going to a grocery store, another species to be collected, and then have them changed into an ever-growing network of eldritch horrors who appear to have no beginning or end, at least in this universe. The steps needed to be taken in order to overwhelm any species that the Brethren Moon has come across. Well, coming across them is a generous term. It seems with humanity, we were really more of a desired endpoint, which puts us at odds with our own ecosystems on Earth once the black marker wiped out the dinosaurs and mammals started rapidly changing, probably due to the effects of the black marker. Anyhow, this plan would be followed by a multifaceted attack on all things associated with animals that the Brethren Moons wanted to overcome. The issue is, however, in the immortalized words of Dr. Ian Malcolm, life, finds a way. Typically, the process is quite standard. Upon activation of the marker, an energy field would be sent out. This marker signal, as it was known, not only to reanimate into tissue, but it also would induce madness in those exposed to it. Depending on level of intelligence,
it's actually a really well-coordinated assault on whatever species it's trying to take over, right? Because the dementia takes over, all of the mental things take over, right? You have effectively a infection that feeds into itself, right? Especially when you start having things that start morphing into infectors, right? They can infect people. But even then, in the dementia and the madness that people are going through, they're prone to game end other things, or, game end themselves, as evident by Dead Space Extraction, right? There was a point where just someone fell from a very high distance. It's very cool because it combines the body horror and the psychological horror aspects very well, and it kind of intertwines them, not unlike the design for the markers, right? How they intertwine in that double helix kind of thing. Body horror and psychological horror they go together very, very well in Dead Space. And so after you have the initial outbreak of, the madness, dementia, etc., then you start getting necromorphs. And even then, the necromorphs that it does get, you start getting variants, right? You start getting the corruption, which is going to be hampering people. Even in game, we see Isaac being unable to move fast through it, right? So you're like, clunk, 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 clunk. But even then, you're in rig armor, a very heavy suit. Now imagine somebody in tennis shoes or flip-flops, right? And then they fall down. It's going to be really moist in there. It's going to smell probably god-awful. And you have the gas that's also leaking as well. The little fog that's over the corruption as well. Imagine inhaling that, and now have a slasher or a leaper after you, right? You have the slashers that are, it's their gait, allows them to trap people, right? You have leapers that can leap vast distances. They can also survive GOG, so nowhere's really safe. and then it's the inevitable goal is to unalive most of the population, or enough of it that they can start a mass convergence event, create another Brotherhood Moon. Honestly, it is a very good series. I spent way too long in this series, and I absolutely love it.
This could have several impacts. I suggested prior that much like how Einstein had an extra fold in his frontal lobe, as well as many other areas too, but in particular the frontal lobe is associated with consciousness, understanding, planning, and abstract thought, that this was probably important. Now, it should be noted, extra folding here doesn't necessarily denote increased intelligence. However, undeniably, Einstein had it, and he was incredibly adept. So should the brains of those who resisted the marker signal longer be examined, I would go out on a limb and say it's very likely you would find a similar folding or at least increased tissue. The mind's ability to work out the information that was being impressed upon it by the marker is absolutely overwhelming. And considering Isaac, who resisted the marker for quite some time, was able to do so, that is because he had increased intelligence and also willpower. So this is the issue that the Brethren Moons would run into. There were still even others who, despite being exposed to the marker signal, never actually would suffer any ill effects. Lexi Weller is known as a person who on Aegis 7, at that time of the Necromorph outbreak, was absolutely immune to the effects of the marker. Even going as far as creating an area of effect where those who were currently experiencing the ill effects of having their minds altered by the marker would essentially come out of it and come back to reality if they were close enough to her.
I would love more on that, because we got Dead Space 2 DLC with her, right? It was the DLC, and I think the main character got ganked at the end of the DLC, right? Or the character we were playing. Like, I don't know if they brought her back, or if they brought her back in like supplement material, like a comic or something, but she had a really cool plot point going.
Second person is just kind of my own conspiracy theory, but Ellie is also immune to the marker.
That's why I thought Ellie.
Given that she is on Titan Station and then Tal Volantis, absolutely surrounded by markers, and yet she never experiences any ill effects. Because of the countless species assimilated in this manner, at some point in the past, it is likely that the Brethren Moons would have adjusted their plan to eventually involve other ways to attack any kind of stubbornly staying alive people, or aliens, or really whatever. So if someone is outright immune, obviously they cannot actually be affected by the marker signal, and because of that, a more physical approach would be necessary.
Thus we get Necromorphs.
Progression of a Necromorph outbreak very likely follows the same path that it was initially set up as. Back in the day, it is possible outbreaks just relied solely on the madness induced and the physical attacks by those who were currently succumbing. A response by another alien species brain to resist the marker was noted, and then the marker would respond in turn by creating necromorphs capable of cutting down any animal depending on how much of a nuisance they were. But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke to get 15% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. If you haven't pulled the trigger on a pair of earbuds and are in the market for some awesome sound experiences, then look no further than Raycon's everyday earbuds. With over 3 million sold so far, they are clearly a fan favorite. Not to mention the upgraded earbuds offering everything you love about Raycons and more, because now you also get active noise cancellation and ergonomic design, multi-point connectivity that allows you to pair two devices at once, and still that same super comfortable fit. Personally, I use my everyday earbuds at the gym because I really don't want to hear people yelling about benching the bar. It's great that you're here, bro, but why are you doing that? Raycons come in also vibrant new colors to complement any and all skin tones. My personal favorite as far as earbuds are concerned is flat black. Nothing too flashy, and it's pretty much timeless. Of course, the protective granite case also looks pretty sweet as well. So if you're in the market for some new earbuds, then by clicking the link in the description box or going to buyraycon.com/Roanoke, you can get 50% off your Raycon purchase day, plus free shipping. All right, let's get back to it.
And then, I liked it. 8 out of 10 ad read, 9 out of 10. It was a pretty abrupt shift into the ad read. I think it went a little long, but that's probably most likely talking point length, right? Like, I mean, ad was good. I'm not saying it was bad by any means. I don't know how would I make that better? I'm not entirely sure. But it was solid. I'll give it that. I liked it.
Then comes the most badass of species, humanity. Humanity appeared to be rather annoying in the grand scheme of things. While yes, you would definitely fall under the sway of the marker, the reality is we may have had too much time to cook. And not like in a TikTok way. I'm talking about, it seems like we were supposed to be assimilated when we were just a one-planet species, but what would ultimately happen is the Brethren Moon over Tal Volantis was frozen, possibly preventing the continued assimilation of species.
Right.
My reasoning for this is that it does not appear as though the aliens of Tal Volantis, despite being very technologically advanced, ever truly got off-world after discovering the markers. And this may ultimately be the desire of the Brethren Moons. See, you just have a species consume its resources, discover the marker, allow energy to be gleaned off of it as that species essentially becomes complacent and stays on world, innately cause that conquered species to desire to tap into this energy and then spread the markers across their planet.
I mean, at that point, it builds that reliance, right? Well, you've already tapped out your resources. Why would you ever go into the horrors of space, right? Why would you ever go out there? Versus, hey, we have all this energy from these black and red markers, right? You could have all the energy. We can fix you, and then you get that reliance on the marker, and thus, the noose is tightened.
Morph outbreak commences, and then boom goes the dynamite. A convergence event happens, creating the moon. But something to note that does relate to the Wheezers, as we will get there momentarily. On Tau Volantis, did you notice how all the Necromorphs from the Tau Volantians are really no different from one another? In fact, it appears even their morphology is relatively similar to how they appeared naturally. I believe this is because specialization was not necessary here. Homo sapiens, however, would be annoyingly different. Because of this, humanity would spread out amongst the stars, claiming planet after planet completely unchecked. Eventually, we too would stumble across worlds that likely could have supported life, but were completely barren as most of its atmosphere and crust had been just sucked off into space. We probably didn't know that, but we know that now. Eventually, once a necromorph outbreak did start originally with the Scaff at the helm on Tau Volantis, quickly it became apparent that specialized roles would be needed to deal with humanity's warlike nature. Fighting even while losing your mind would take place as the soldiers would drop necromorphs in open combat. And the reality is, unlike what can be alleged to the Tau Volantians, humanity does not rely on hand-to-hand combat in order to stop a slasher. We would just use countermeasures, and that would keep them at a distance. At least, you take off their legs so they can't run at you. But this initial outbreak may have influenced how our species would be approached in the future. And also, don't count how many times I say that word. It's going to happen a lot. So because while the markers operate standardly, it's important to remember that there is a connection to the Brethren Moons, and with that, whatever inspires the Brethren Moons to conglomerate together. As made mention, this is likely going to be a type of energy that is not even really from our plane of existence. The markers would appear to simply act as a conduit of sorts. So once Scaff game-ended everyone associated with Tau Volantis, the red marker would be taken to Aegis 7, where it would be dropped off. Why they didn't just strap a nuke to that thing and get rid of it is beyond me. Maybe there was hope for the future that this thing could be safely harnessed, but either way, it then would sit there for 200 years. Or it
was an asset that is just too... Because it was known that it was here, right? Like, it's not like they just lost it kind of is reminiscent of Aliens, right? Not the first one, but the second one, right? Like, there's very strong parallels to going down to the planet, and you find the ship, and there's a bunch of infectors in there, right? Face huggers, right? And we knew that this planet existed. EarthGov, as far as I'm aware, and most likely even the Church of Unitology. No, the Church of Unitology did know it was here, right? Like, that was part of the twist in regards to the Unitologists on board, right? They had to make this journey, and that like the mining operation was kind of a cover up, and it was just like, it's greed and corporate profits. But I mean, the way that I understood it is that like it was known that it was here. It's just dealing with it. And you really couldn't deal with it, because the last time they tried to deal with it, I mean, there's a hive mind literally sleeping under the planet.
Eventually, it would be discovered by Unitologists on Aegis 7, along with the brass Unitologists on
Aegis 7 was a black, not a red.
From here, we all know the story. Crap goes completely sideways for everyone involved, originating from the planet, and then being brought up to the Planet Cracker ship due to the marker being on board. Everything bad happens. With that said, it would appear, though, that the marker, through its connection, did not forget about humanity. Almost immediately after its activation, humans would begin following the standard pathway of insanity and dropping others, as in the first slasher would form. Once this happens, the real threat begins. With the slasher slashing as it does, other variants of Necromorphs began to form, given how much time had passed, where a group had been dropped, or what specialization was needed. For humanity...
Doesn't the movie go into detail, or the movies go into more detail, where necromorphs can never truly be game ended? You can kind of incapacitate them. It shares actually a lot of parallels with what is the SCP, something, the flesh that hates, right? There's parallels that you can dive into with that. So necromorphs, they're just puppets. That's all they are. They're just puppets to the marker's will, right? And, whether you're a slasher, whether you're a lurker, whether you're a Wheezer, whether you're a guardian, right? Guardians being put at, specific portions, right? Specific places that do need to be guarded, that kind of thing, right? It is bent to that marker as well. There are arguments that, some of them are sentient, some of them are not sentient, right? What is it? The exploders, the one with the explosive arm sack, all the fat in one arm, right? That they bark at each other, or they try to scream at each other, and the fact that they're screaming, it's, I guess, like theorized that it's like marker's punishment for being defiant to them. You have the raptors from 2 and 3, right? Where they bark and they screech at each other, right? Which shows pack communication with each other. But and even then the guardians, right? You have the immature and then the mature guardians, where you have people that are just screaming because, you know, their guts are kind of getting rearranged and kind of flailing about, right? So it just turns into an interesting situation when you start to look into, there's not really any cognizance there unless it's specific type of forms. And even then, that could be more of a play on the marker, right? Like, oh, well, that guardian used to be Brad from accounting or Chad from engineering, right? And then, you know, you hear him screaming and you go there and it just ends up being a guardian and the guardian game ends you, right? There's a number of things that this can do because of how the world and the universe and the necromorphs are set up. But getting back to the necromorphs, you don't actually ever game in them. That is a game mechanic. As far as I'm aware, they will eventually, you know, reattach themselves, or they can come out of like the corruption on the walls and stuff like that, if I understand that correctly. So the game balancing point is that, you know, most necromorphs would kind of be more like hunters, and I would imagine hunters would even then be supercharged beyond that. So just things to consider in regards to when you're looking at Dead Space and the true horrors of the Ishimura, Titan Station, Tau Volantis, etc., that you're looking at a really just aggressive entity that's patient, but once it gets aggressive, it gets aggressive. If they get separated enough, well, that's like, so what I'm saying is you can game end them by, you know, removing the limbs, right? And they're just kind of static there, but eventually they will get back up, right? Because they're just puppets to the marker. Yes, you can take them out, you can sever them in certain ways to where they can't move, right? Unless they're going to do the Monty Python, you know, has no arms, has no legs, kind of tries to hop at you, right? Which some of them kind of do. No, I'm thinking of the Regenerator from RE4, never mind. But, like, they can eventually will reassemble and reassimilate into either the corruption or, well, then they just turn to the corruption then. And then the corruption can birth new necromorphs, right?
Every countermeasure that we had to be met. Wearing armor, slasher blade can go through that. Built up a barrier of flimsy metal, quickly thrown together because it's spooky out there.
Spooky.
Exploder can blow its way through, allowing others to run in behind it.
Exactly.
Lock down a security door in an effort to seal something away, or maybe even yourself. Brutes were large enough to break through these weak points, which in turn did nothing to save you. Fled to space with an air tank, and you just didn't want to drift away into the void, so your plan was just to stay near the ship while help arrives. Lurkers would be on the outside of the ship, ready to throw pieces of their vertebrae at you in order to pierce your suit.
It's nutty.
Every counter that humanity had in order to protect itself was met with something that could overcome it. However, one in particular seems to have had it way worse than the rest. I mean, arguably, it's all pretty terrible, but sometimes, much like the Wall Guardians who appear to be conscious during their transformation process, there is a psychological element to the altering. Sometimes it's not just about raw brute strength, but it also comes down to screwing mentally with the species that you're trying to absorb, to break their will and focus. This version is known as the Wheezer.
Croissant.
The Wheezer Necromorph is one that, again, like the Wall Guardian, is a person who's sessile, but is also there to serve as a way to completely mess with anyone who witnesses it because of how they actually became what they are. The Wheezer Necromorph also serves another critical purpose. It's no secret that humanity could section off entire areas and continue fighting, but on a ship, air is very precious as a commodity. Again, this shows an understanding of the environment and that the Necromorph outbreak is taking place in. The Wheezer Necromorph serves primarily as an atmosphere changer. Secondarily, it serves as a warning to what can happen. The line of thinking was that you needed to drop in order to become a Necromorph, but according to the logs, that's not necessarily true all the time, which I break away from.
No, I mean, we see that with the Hunter, right? That's why the Hunter itself has the capabilities that it does, right? Or even then, like, you can be infected, right, when you're alive, right? Have the infector, the little bat one, you know, have this little proboscis, right, inject you with the bacteria, and then suddenly you're a necromorph. Like, yeah, reasonably you kind of look into that and go, yeah, I mean, you got to drop in order to become a necromorph. But no, like, yeah, the logs do support that. The Hunter was, yes, while he was artificially created, is also evident that necromorphs being created from living tissue, living beings, are possible. And even then, we see Dead Space 1, we had the first infector that you come across, right? Or was the first infector? Yes, because it was before the morgue, right? Where you get to medical, you go to the right, it's the zero gravity stasis therapy thing that you have to drag, right, with kinesis. And you go across that, there's a locked door that leads to Mercer's Hunter room, but on the left there's a power node door, and you go through that and you see this like captain start to cough up a bunch of stuff, and you come back later and he's a necromorph, right?
For a moment, there was this video made disputing my view on the Guardian.
What? Wow, that's old Kip. Oh my god. What do you mean you don't know if this is the video or not? What's the claim being made?
Necromorph, still being conscious through the process, and even while it attacks, as potentially this individual was seen as more annoying than anything. It's important to remember that the
Wait, what?
There was this video made disputing my view on the Guardian Necromorph, still being conscious through the process, and even while it attacks, as potentially this individual was seen as more annoying than anything. It's important to remember that the brother
Trying to work through that sentence. What does that mean?
Attacks as potentially this individual was seen as more annoying than anything. It's important to remember.
I have no idea what he means by more annoying and not. I mean, like it's debated, right? I mean, it could have been that video, like in this very own video, right? We're debating the consciousness and the cognizance of Guardians. I mean, are they awake? Are they not? And even then, if you really want to get super quasi-meta about it, how much of it is the marker just messing with you, right? Spoiler alert, the big twist of Dead Space Remake, right? Like, yeah, the mark, what we were seeing as one person was portrayed to us as well. So even then, we really can't trust the narrator. I don't really know how to take that. Like, I don't quite understand the sentence, I guess. Like, am I the annoying person there? Is the enemy annoying? I don't quite understand it. It's cool to be seen in a Roanoke video, though. Like, that's kind of cool. Like, I love their content. I just don't know, like, how to work through that.
That the Brethren Moons are all a little sadistic. Remember, at the end of Dead Space 3 in the actual real ending, they were asking Isaac where Earth was and just screwing with them the whole time. They already knew where Earth was. They had no problem. They're just like, yeah, I'm just going to talk smack the entire time. That's kind of what they do. Anyhow, if I remember like a counterpoint from it, it was necessary for the person to be brain dead, essentially for them to change. As seen with the Wheezers, this counters that point. But then also look to the feeder necromorphs. Those were
It was probably not my video then, because as far as I'm aware, I don't mention anything in regards to lack of brain activity being mandatory. The marker doesn't discriminate. Like, whether you're a paraplegic in a chair, whether you're a toddler, whether you're on Tau Volantis as a starved researcher, or whether you're a giant hulking brute of an alien, right? It doesn't matter. I mean, you're all just biomass to the marker, to the Brethren Moons, to the convergence event. So it probably wasn't my video.
Soldiers who would then eat necromorph flesh in order to survive, which in turn slowly changed them into a necromorph while they were still alive. The Wheezer
also right there, yeah, perfect point. They were alive. They consumed necromorph flesh because, you know, people when they're hungry do things, right? We've gone, like, historically, scientifically, we've gone over this, we've proven this, we've explored this, right? Like, yeah, they're alive. They have that kind of hunter effect where we had a being that was alive take in part of a necromorph, and it changed them into a necromorph, or a form of necromorph.
Is extremely similar in this regard, except the point at which they were infected is slightly different. The feeder necromorph, due to ingesting necromorph flesh, would cause the extreme hunger as the tissue in their stomach was changed. As this happened, it's highly likely that the ghrelin hormone, which increases appetite and actually stimulates the release of growth hormone, would have been kicked into overdrive due to the necromorph tissue screwing with the natural release of this hormone, which in turn would drive those soldiers to become cannibalistic at first, and then turn into the feeders. In terms of the Wheezers, the exposure route would be the air. As stated in Log 3 in particular, Liz Cross goes on to say that she was working down in hydroponics and she needs to record all their names. Hanukkah, Holly, Antonov, Park, there's so many. She goes on to say that she doesn't know what gas they took in, she just saw them change, the crack when their lungs burst out like flowers. This log is highly interesting as it denotes that the Leviathan itself, which if you'd like to see a video on that, I did that last week, it was actually putting off gas that the 8 Wheezers that you have to take out were exposed to. At first, massive lung irritation and coughing would likely ensue as tissue would be altered in the presence of necrotissue taking over. But the question is, how? Well, before getting there, let's take a look at its morphology to determine what may be going on internally first.
I actually have a family member who I think I showed that or explained this to, that exact scene. And I'm pretty sure, because I don't remember if I streamed, because I did stream this, like there's VODs of me doing my last playthrough of this. I'm pretty sure they hemorrhaged out to the point that they shouldn't be cognizant. You only have, what, 5 liters of red paint? Paints. You have 5 liters of red paint. You lose, what, 2? You're done. that's bordering on obscene. So I mean, unless it's someone else's, unless it's other people, but like reasonably from what these wounds look like, whether they're lacerations, punctures, etc. I mean, this could also just be the marker messing with you too, right? Marker toying with you. You see how even if something doesn't make sense, it can still make sense narratively because of what the markers do.
Starting with the feet, this person is one of the more human-looking necromorphs, and there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about here in a second. The feet are in their regular plantigrade form, but the legs have become fused together by the cancerous growth of skin facilitated by exposure to the viral bacteria. And that statement always angers someone. It's basically bacteria that has viral properties and invades cells by attaching to the membrane and disseminating its own genetic coding. This then...
I mean, viral bacteria. Viral sounds like that would be the what? Adjective, right? It's a viral bacteria. It's a bacteria, but it acts like it has viral properties. I mean, like, at least presented to me, that makes sense.
Alters the function of the cell, and seemingly this is what's causing the growth on the walls and completely changes how the body operates once exposed. Now, something to note is that your immune system actually can keep it in check, so the marker signal actually has an immunosuppressive effect. So in the case of the Wheezer, this has caused the skin that was touching other skin on the other part of the leg to begin growing and then fusing together. And this
I love how chat's like, sorry if Kip gets in another Roanoke video. You don't understand. Like, I'm when I try to react to people, I try to make sure that I'm being as transformative as I can, as respectful of the source material as I can. I don't quite get the annoying part of that, right? During like the sentence that we went over. And I really hope at the end of the day, I'm not seen as annoying. I really hope that I'm not seen as contentious. I really hope that I don't seem that I'm, in any way negative. Because at the end of the day, I do this because I think this is cool. I like talking to people that know what they're talking about. I have friends who are qualified in their fields. Like one of my friends is an arachnologist, right? Like actual degree arachnologist, right? And I love talking to her. I love talking to Miko because hey, this spider thing. Oh, this spider thing. Kip, this spider thing. I love that spider thing. I'm going to send you this spider thing, the spider Pokemon thing. The spider Pokemon thing is cool, right? And it's so if I show up in the video, especially if I misclaim something, I don't think it was my video, strictly because I don't think I discussed lack of brain activity. That doesn't sound like my video, but then again, it very well could be, and I just don't remember it, right? No, it's cool. It's awesome. I love having these discussions, and, he does movies and stuff like that. Really, my biggest things are Resident Evil and Dead Space, right? Those are my bread and butter. These are series that I love. And you should, wink, wink, if this kind of content does speak to you, if you like this kind of content. He has a lot of other things covering, The Thing, I think he covers Xenomorphs at some point, right? Old Dead Space, some of the Resident Evil stuff. Honestly, Roanoke is a channel that I love, and I want to see succeed, because he puts out a lot of great content and a lot of great sciencey content. And especially if I have something wrong, whether that's going to be lore, whether that's going to be from a medical standpoint, I love creators like this, because they know what they're talking about. And there's been a couple things where it's just I don't know, we're talking, I think, mosquitoes, something like that, how they serve nothing in an ecosystem. That's one of those things that I'm I'd like to see a source on that, because I have specialists I could talk to, and I'm 99% sure they say that mosquitoes do have a use in the ecosystem, but that could also be I could be reading too far into it. It could be mosquitoes are useless to an ecosystem from a annoyance bias standpoint, right? Mosquitoes are just annoying. They serve no purpose, right? When scientifically is one thing versus opinion is the other, right? It's great. I love it. Roanoke's cool.
Cause bridges of skin to at first form between the legs, which ultimately then cause the legs to just completely grow together, rendering the Wheezer in a kneeling position.
It's immobile.
This position was likely adopted as it's known as the tripod position. When struggling for air, it's natural for humans to put their hands on their knees and lean over. Upon doing so, this actually helps open up the chest and allow more air to actually be drawn in. And back when I played football, my coach would always say that this wasn't true. Well, what is he to say now? Anyhow, as this tissue in their lungs became more necrotized, the O2 levels would begin dropping, and the carotid body and chemosensory reflexes would start reporting this. Now, something important to note is the body actually isn't measuring O2 levels. It has no idea how much oxygen you have in your body. Your body's actually measuring CO2 levels by detecting the pH level of your blood. And this is why carbon monoxide is really bad, as your body doesn't necessarily realize that you're running low on oxygen until it's way too late. You'll just get tired, take a nap, and never wake back up. Your body can begin detecting the acid buildup in the blood, but because carbon monoxide's binding abilities to hemoglobin is much stronger than oxygen, and because of that, you essentially suffocate because oxygen is not being transported around the body because carbon monoxide is just stuck to your hemoglobin. And this is where the issues come from. Anyhow, So the person would eventually drop to their knees when the levels of oxygen got low enough, causing them to take on this posture as they would be gasping for air. This forced intake of air would begin fatiguing their diaphragm and intercostal muscles of the rib cage, but the mutations internally due to the exposure to the gas-containing pieces of Leviathan would inevitably force the changes that we see. Moving up to the quadricep region, we see the skin is still fused with the lower portion of the leg, and getting to the abdomen, we cannot really see anything besides a band of tissue having grown from the floor, and this tissue is composed completely of the corruption which runs directly from the Leviathan. This line may be supplying several things to the Wheezer. First, it may be that it's supplying...
I did notice that. I actually didn't even consider where it came from. Like, that's... Yeah, no, he brings up a good point. He does bring up that vein-looking thing that's going into its mouth, right? I just assumed that it was tied... I didn't know it was tied to the Leviathan. I assumed it was tied to itself in some capacity and helped in some kind of, like, red paint, quote-unquote, functionality, right? Some kind of, like, pressure kind of thing. No, that's interesting. See? I don't know everything. I like not knowing everything. I like watching people that know what they're talking about, or at the very least, know pretty much what they're talking about, and then we can engage in discussion and debate, right? That's a good thing to actually note. Like, that's actually really cool, and I never noticed that.
Positive pressure ventilation, from which we will understand in a second due to how lungs actually work. Second, it may also be providing the gas that the Leviathan produces.
It could be.
Interestingly, does this mean the Wheezer is producing this gas, or is it just simply a point of dissemination for the gas? I believe it's likely a combination.
Yeah,
Moving further up the chest, we see more growths concerning the chest region, but really, the important stuff is around the back, and a reference in the log indicates that the process begins while the person is very much so conscious. One of the logs states they pulled all the regulators from the purifiers and cranked them up as high as they can go. It's effing crazy, but it's all they can do. It should burn off at least some of the gas, they think. They don't know. They go on to say that they have to try something, seeing Hanukkah puke up her own lungs, deleted. That is literally the whole log. So the lungs have exploded out of the back of the ribs, and the vertebral column still seems to be somewhat intact, although it's been yanked up to the point that it appears to connect at almost the back of the head. The arms of the Wheezer are much like the legs in that they have been fused to the sides of the body. The head of the person is still very much so human. The ears, eyes, although they are quite damaged, and mouth are all present, with the lower jaw having fallen away as a tube now exits the mouth.
So we've seen very non-humanoid looking necromorphs, right? Absolutely. I mean, we see the lurkers and stuff. I mean, it's working with what biomass it can, right? And generally, like, you look at a slasher, those kind of things. I mean, the head's pretty much there, right? Lights on, nobody's at home. The limbs are what matter, right, in terms of dead space. But when I look at something like that, and you think from a horror perspective, right, some random walks in, they look at it, it's looking at you, right? Realistically, the marker's looking at you, right? It's going to be a shock factor. Maybe you do a gasp, right? Right? The gas in the room now gets in your lungs. I mean, I could see angles all day with this. I think that Dead Space is such a just wonderfully crafted universe.
I believe this is going to be the trachea having moved up past the esophagus, allowing for the lungs to easily release this gas and bioagent. Looking at the lungs specifically for a moment, this is why I believe there is positive pressure being provided by the Leviathan. Lungs operate in a negative pressure environment. Your lungs are not forcing expansion, your muscles are. When your chest expands, the lungs are pulled along the wall of the chest, which then draws in air. You are now also manually breathing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I am.
This is why, if for any...
I love when people do that. Yes, I am. I am manually breathing.
The reason you have a hole in your chest is going to result in something known as a pneumothorax. This is when air leaks between the space of your lung and the chest wall, and this will collapse your lung as the pressure is equalized. What you should do, it's also called a sucking wound. If you got a piece of plastic, just go ahead and put it over. The old way of thinking was that you needed to burp the wound, essentially. Now you don't do that anymore. You just cover it up and then go to the hospital. That's what you should do.
Right.
But by this knowledge, because the lungs have exploded out the back of the Wheezer, and us knowing the lungs have no ability themselves to actually expand, this would mean that the pressure is causing them to expand, and that has to be coming from the tube. Now, initially, how did they expand out of like this person? I'm glad you're asking that question, because I believe it was the intercostal muscles that would be affected, and given their proximity, they would be able to pull with enough force, which would then break the ribs away from the spine specifically, and this would expose the lungs, which most definitely appear to be exploding out. Lungs simply do not have the strength to make it past bone, but muscle, if contracting hard enough, can definitely break bones. As a result of their infection, the Leviathan viral bacteria then entered the lungs, where it would begin changing the operation of the breathing. From here, positive ventilation will be provided by the Leviathan, but then, if the Leviathan appears to be inflating and deflating these lungs, why use humanity in the first place? Well, the Brethren Moons are dicks, and I also believe this is a direct example of a psychological aspect. there is technically speaking no reason to use a human in this capacity, but it's done to decrease the sanity and willpower of those who witness it. In fact, Elizabeth Cross pretty much almost lost her mind after seeing this. More so because given how they do not wish to attack and really just appear to be struggling to breathe, as shown by their propensity to kind of cough and draw in as much air as possible, or at least attempt to, it seems as though the brain may be in there in some capacity, and along with that irritation to the tissue that hasn't been fully changed, Team Necromorph is causing these reactions, which in turn is being reported to the brain that is still functional. So what is this gas that's produced? Interestingly, given that the Leviathan is using the lungs in just a way to change the habitat, I would have to say that the mixture must be two things. First, oxygen is required for fire to burn. When approaching a Wheezer in a room that has been basically filled with this gas for quite some time, the first thing that you will note is that there is a green substance floating all around. This
I do really like when games do that. I was playing through Pokemon Leaf Green recently, right? And when you get to the one island, Sevilla, right, and Bill's having to work with Celio to get the PC up, it's like, oh yeah, your PC, PCs aren't connecting to the mainland. We're too far out, right? And that's what they're supposed to work on. And I'm just like, oh, it's probably just some dialogue, right? And then I went to the PC and it didn't work, right? It was consistent with the game. And then in Dead Space, right, when you try to go up to a Wheezer Necromorph, right, which it's got flammable gas all around it, you can't use your flamethrower, right? And I like details like that. It's the little things that make games and worlds like this shine so much better. Because how many times have you been told you can't do this, you can't go here, you can't this is not this is not possible, or if you do this, this is the consequence in a game, and it not followed through on that, right? I love Dead Space so much.
Material in particular is going to be the viral bacteria. This is primarily what grows the corruption, but the aerosolized version's whole reason for being is that much like any other infection, it needs to gain access to the body because your skin is a great barrier, usually, so it has to be put into the air in order to be breathed in. The second thing you will notice is that the air is poisonous, but it also says the oxygen is almost completely gone. This is noted when you try to use a flamethrower and there's not enough oxygen in the environment to produce a flame. This also doubles as a way for the Brotherhood Moons to prevent an area from being purged with fire in order to clear out the biological agent.
No holy fire can be used.
This gas is likely just going to be your standard CO2, as O2 is just taken from the air by the Leviathan, and considering it is a 10 kiloton mass, this comes out to roughly around 169,000 people. CO2 and viral bacteria are then just pumped through the tubing attached to the abdomen that then expands the lungs out of the back of the person, as then they cough it up with the exposed trachea.
Chat does try to counter. The wiki does say you first have to be unalive to become a necromorph. The pathogen only affects necrotic tissue. I would contest that, because we've seen with the Regenerator, we've seen with the Guardians, right? We've seen with the Hunter. Well, Regenerators, Hunters, technically different things. I discount the Regenerator from 2 because that's probably a composition of 2 people. I don't really know. It's tiny hive mind. I take issue with that, but we don't have enough lore to really give a conclusive diagnosis, if that makes sense to me. If that makes sense. So I think you can have an educated debate around the subject, and there can be nuance within it, right? Like, things are rarely black and white. There's an infinity of gray in between.
That much biomass converting oxygen into CO2, it's not hard to see why a small room would...
The Hunter was artificially inserted to the host. But once again, the feeder necromorphs fed on tissue. They fed on necromorph tissue, right? And whether they expired or not, like, they still became the feeder necromorphs that you see in 3, right? And so, realistically, if the Hunter is possible, there's not really anything stopping more from happening, right? And even then, we have, I just had the point. Oh, I'm so far in this video, and I totally just lost it. Even though it was artificially created, like, it can happen again. Oh, sorry, the bacteria, right? We clearly see the bacteria doing its work on the living person. Once again, go back to the medical thing, you go to the right, go past the little thing you have to drag, right? Hits the power node door on the left before you go up the lift, right? Where we see the officer in there, right? Not the captain, I was misquoting that. Where the officer in there is puking up that bacteria, right? So we can see that it has an effect on living tissue.
Quickly be rendered non-viable for a human to exist in. And given enough time, without a doubt, the entire ship would quickly be poisoned by the aerosolized viral bacteria, and along with that, all the CO2 being pumped all over the ship, which in turn would suffocate any hiding person. But then the last thing we need to answer is, what is the deal with the enzyme that you create? Again, I think this also indicates that this person is still alive somewhat. Injecting the enzyme The whole purpose is to break down tissue, likely inducing a form of apoptosis by dissolving the cellular membrane. It appears to work on both humans and corruption alike, and because of this, when injecting it into the brainstem of a person, this would start dissolving their brain. If the brain was not in control, the thrashing around would not really be happening. But once in the body of the Wheezer, the breathing mechanisms of the Leviathan taking in the O2 would transport the enzyme back to the Leviathan, weakening its critical areas concerning its gas production. This would damage the tissue and cause it to enter a less adept state overall, allowing Isaac to attack and remove it from food storage. But you do have to take out the person who is kind of a necromorph, but also kind of still alive. The Wheezer is something of a psychological threat, but also a real threat when it comes to survival. While one of the least aggressive necromorphs out there, should it be left to its own devices on the ship, it will eventually poison the entire environment. It can be assumed that the purpose of these creatures on a large scale, say a planet, would be to poison the entire atmosphere.
Right.
In doing so, even those who sequestered themselves in bunkers where the necromorphs can't penetrate, they still need to breathe. And by replacing the very foundation of life, this being the atmosphere, it would only be a matter of time before air scrubbers failed and everyone, anywhere, would suffocate. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave me a like would be a baller review, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the missing people in Yosemite National Park. I know you're not supposed to go in there and stay strapped, but I don't know, man. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer. Thank you, my guy. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer, Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Dakota23, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, and Trash Panda in a Trench Coat. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way, and you guys are awesome. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
No, I love this. It was really weird seeing an old Kip thing. So, I mean, maybe if I misquoted, hey, subscribe one quick. I don't turn notifications on, so, but I definitely give that subscribe mechanic. No, it was weird. It was weird seeing old Kip in there. I don't know how to feel about that. Like, just, oh man, it's been so long. But you know, thank you, Roanoke, for continuing to make just awesome videos. And you know, I apologize if it came off as annoying. You know, I just want to make sure that I'm, you know, having a good rapport with people that I react to. And even then, there's always if you don't want a reaction up, if you have a contention with the reaction, you know, more than happy to be receptive of emails, you know, back and forth. And if you really don't want me to react to something, that's perfectly fine, you know. But what I can say, as of right now, if you haven't checked out Roanoke Gaming, go check out Roanoke Gaming. In the description down below, you will see not only this video, right? Video in the description, you'll see Roanoke Gaming's channel as well, the link in the name of it. So if you are interested in checking him out, I've made it as easy as possible for you. Thank you, Roanoke Gaming, once again for making such an excellent video, and thank you everyone for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Let's start this. Dead Space, Resident Evil, 2 of my favorite franchises. Love talking about the lore, love talking about them. Let's start some discussions. Do you too also like Dead Space? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll see you all in the next one.